In this tutorial, we're going to create a splash screen and then it transfers over to a different scene using our scene manager class. Alright, so let's play that pump up music real quick. First, I owe you guys an apology because it has been way too long since I updated this series or done any work with my bring back for that matter. I've been incredibly busy. As you can see, it's, well, you can't really see, but it's like 3 a.m. right now, and I felt really guilty and I needed to do a tutorial. So here I am, and hopefully it's a decent tutorial, but no promises. So the first thing that we need to do is set up our scene manager variable. Since we've created a scene manager, we're going to use it now. So we're just going to call this scene manager. Pretty awesome, right? And also we want to set up a camera called M camera. Kind of default to put M's before your variables, but I rarely do that. Anyways, the reason we need to set up a camera is because when we pass in the information to our scene manager class, if we go back over here, our constructor takes in 3 parameters: the base game activity, the engine, and the camera. So we need to create a camera and pass it into this constructor to get our scene manager going. So you'll see how this works out here in a second. The first thing that we want to do is go into our AndEngine options. Again, this gets called by default, and this is where we set up our camera. All we're going to do is delete this guy out here. We don't want it to be just a local scope or local variable within this method only. We're going to have it be our class variable. Okay, so now it's going to be pretty much the exact same camera. Everything's looking pretty good. We create our engine options as well here, and we return those engine options, which it's looking for. So nothing's really changed since the way that we originally set up our game activity. So let's go on to the onCreate resources. Previously, all we did is we called this function load graphics, which is here. We kind of set up all the graphics that we need for a game, but instead what we're going to do is we're going to create our scene manager variable, get that set up. So let's just comment out this load graphics here, because we're going to no longer need that. We're going to actually load the graphics from the scene manager class that we set up. If you guys remember, I know it's been a while. So just go ahead and create our scene manager variable. We're going to set this equal to be a new scene manager, passing in the parameters that we need. For base game activity variable that we're going to pass in, that's going to be this class, since this extends the base game activity. So we're passing in this information within our scene manager so it knows the base game activity. Next is the engine that we want to set up. For engine, we're going to create we're going to use the engine variable. As you can see, this comes from base game activity. It's not a variable we set up, but we have access to it again. So this is something that comes with AndEngine. That's the engine that we're going to pass into the scene manager as well. So just put M engine, and lastly our camera is going to be that camera we just set up, again M camera. Okay, so now we have constructed our scene manager, which is pretty awesome. The next thing that we want to do within this create resources is, instead of just loading up some graphics resources for our entire game, we're just going to load up the resources that we need for our splash screen. That way we can display the splash screen right away, very quickly, and then we can load our other resources as it's displaying our splash. So how we're going to do that is we're going to relate to the scene manager that we set up here. We're just going to say load splash resources, and that's all we're going to do. Again, then we're going to say, hey, the callback's done. We've loaded our splash resources. Again, I'm going to jump over to the scene manager where we load our splash resources, loaded up our ping that we put in our resources from a previous tutorial, and that's all it's doing. So it's pretty much just like this load graphics, but again, the beauty is we're only loading for the splash screen, not our entire game's resources as we'd have to do previously. So that's looking pretty good. We've set up our scene manager and loaded our splash resources. Now we can either delete this since we aren't using it anymore, or I'm just going to leave it there for now, but you can leave a comment, unused. Man, I can't type right now. Alright, so again, once this callback is finished, it's going to go to the onCreate scene, And here we can also kind of wipe out all this stuff because our scene manager is going to do this for us. I don't know if you guys want to leave that in there as well. I'm just going to copy and paste it so you can see our old way of doing things and the new. Okay. Again, this method is all it's looking for is a created scene, and you know, we had the old way of doing that, but I'm going to be like, hi, Billy Mays here. All we got to do is relate to our scene manager, wham, and bam, thank you, ma'am. We have created our splash screen scene. Okay, it's that easy, guys. That's all we need to do, again, because within our scene manager, we set up all this stuff within the create splash scene here. So that's all we're relating to. Again, this returns a scene, if you guys remember. And again, that's what this callback is looking for, is a scene. So again, we could delete this stuff and save some space, but just for future reference, or if you want to look at the old way of doing things, you can do that as well. Pretty self-explanatory. Again, we're calling this create walls method up here in the old way of doing things. We can delete that as well. Anyways, let's move on. The next thing that we want to do is populate scene. Again, this is after the scene's been created. We might want to create a sprite or something within the scene. We're gonna, again, kind of wipe this stuff out. So I'm just gonna comment out the old way, and we're good. So now if we load this on our application, it'll show our splash screen. It won't move to a different scene yet. That's what we need to set up within this populate scene. We're just gonna set up a little timer, and once the timer hits 0, it's going to go to a different scene. Okay, and how we do this is we set up an event listener. Again, this will be to the AndEngine, that class or that variable we can use from the base game activity, and we're just going to say register update handler. What an update handler is it handles updates, and again, every millisecond we're updating our game. Not necessarily millisecond, but you know, we're updating 60 frames per second or something like that. This update handler will be able to track that information and process it and handle an event if the timer hits a certain amount. So as you can see here, it's looking for an update handler that we need to register to our game engine. We're going to create a new handler, which is going to be a timer handler. And as you can see here, we have a couple of options. I'm going to put one that's seconds, and it has a callback timer as well, so I'm going to click that there. The seconds that we're going to allow this to wait is just going to be 3 seconds, and it's going to be a float value. So just put 3F, and that's basically saying 3 seconds. The callback that we want to do is we want to create a new callback. So we're going to say new iTimer callback. That's the callback it's looking for. So just go ahead and enter that, and we're going to put a semicolon here to make sure we don't forget that. So again, just to go over what this is doing, we're registering an update handler, and we're creating a new handler, which is basically a timer. After 3 seconds, it's going to call this callback method. So whatever we do within here is going to happen after three seconds of the onPopulate scene method being called. Hopefully that's not too confusing. What we're eventually going to do is have this handler not have a time, and once it's loaded all the resources for our game, then it's going to go to the menu scene. But since we don't have a lot of resources in our game right now, this is just kind of a test to make sure our scene manager is working. So we're just going to wait 3 seconds, not necessarily how long it takes to load all of our game resources, but we're going to wait 3 seconds, and then we're going to change the scene. But to change the scene is going to be pretty easy. All we have to do is relate to our scene manager, and we're going to say load, I don't know what comes next after the splash screen, probably the menu resources. So load menu resources. Let's change that. Add an S to that. I know that's not our actual method, but just add an S to that, and we're going to change that within our scene manager class as well. So load splash resources, load game resources, and load menu resources as well. Okay, so it's just going to call this method. Right here we aren't actually loading anything within our scene manager. We can do that later if we need to load some resources, but you get the idea. So save that, go back to our game activity, and we've loaded our menu resources. Next we're going to relate to the scene manager again, and we're going to say .create menu scene, and that's going to return a scene to us. So again, if we go to the scene manager class, it's going to create our menu scene, which is exactly the same as our splash screen, except it's going to have a black background. As you can see here, zeros instead of ones. It's going to be a black background, and it's going to return that scene back to us. The next thing that we want to do is go down here within our enum kind of handling. We're going to call this method and change to the menu scene. That will actually relate to the engine and set the scene to the menu scene that we set up here, that we just created. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's just go back and do scene manager dot set current scene, and again it has to be that enum that we set up within our scene manager here. We're going to relate to menu. Because again down here it'll process that menu as loading up the menu scene. So how we relate to that enum is just do all scenes dot menu. Pretty simple. The last thing that we have to do is, since we registered this update handler, we also want to unregister that, because we don't want to have a lot of update handlers or a lot of handlers registered to our game. That'll slow things down. So we originally registered it, and then we want to unregister it after the time has passed, if that makes sense. So we probably want to do that first up here. We're just going to do we're just going to relate to the engine again, mEngine dot unregister update handler. We're just going to relate to what's being passed in. So it's going to be this name. I'm going to copy and paste that there. So we're just unregistering this timer handler that we registered up here. Okay. So again, we unregister, load up the resources. We don't really need to do this one, but then we create our menu scene, and then we actually change it with this set current scene method here. So that's kind of how our scene manager works. Let's run this. And I'm actually kind of streaming off my actual phone because once we get into game development, I want to actually use my fingers to test the game. I think it'll be better that way, but this is kind of slow, so we'll see. But here's our splash screen, and then after 3 seconds it goes to our menu scene. Both of them look pretty much the same, but our scene manager is working. That's how we use it. Pretty simple. Hopefully it's not too confusing. If you guys have any questions or it's not making sense, just leave me a comment and I'll try to address them. And again guys, I apologize for taking so long to start creating these tutorials. It would really help motivate me if you guys could share these tutorials with other people, or even like if you go onto our website, just click some of these buttons over here. Definitely would appreciate it. It helps me stay motivated. It showed me that there's still a lot of interest in this and you guys still want the tutorials. So it'll help me to work harder and get more tutorials done, and hopefully it'd bring more traffic to our site. So thanks guys for watching, and I appreciate it. Click the subscribe button, also the like button on YouTube. We would love to see that as well. So thanks again guys, and see you in the next tutorial.